So, who remembers what the subject was last week? Adolescence, yes. And any thoughts and comments from last week? You remember any one point, one thought, one something, one thing that you remember from last week? No? Don't you all say it all at one time? The main idea was what? I'm going to jog your memory as soon as my clicker is here. Can you go to the next one then? Okay, great. So I'll just give you some pointers. The summary of what Shervin talked about adolescence. Now, do you know why we're talking about adolescence? The week before we talked about childhood. Then we talked about adolescence. And now we're going to be talking about adulthood. Any idea why we're doing this? Any thoughts? No? We started with David knowing who he is, his identity. Yes, Chorus. Different perspective, yes, and also, thank you very much, and what else? Knowledge of our past and our own selves, right? So in order for us to really know God, we need to know ourselves, right? So it's very important that we really look back at some of the challenges we've had. And we also learn that it's okay to lament. It's okay to bring our thoughts and feelings and our prayers to God. But first and foremost, if we want to strengthen our identity with God, we really need to know a little bit more about who we are in different stages of life. So the summary of our adolescence last time was that. Thank you. So mainly we talked about our teenage years. And what Shervin was talking about as teenagers, we really do face a lot with blame and shame. Blame and shame are two main things that are really, really prevalent in our teenage years. We're very unsure of ourselves. We're going through some physical changes. And a lot of things about us is just not right. So and our society is telling us that we're not good enough. We're short. So this is one of the things that he talked about. He also talked about the boxes and the attics of our houses. I remember. I really like that what you said, Shervin, about that box, because I was thinking about how muddy that box is, how pochot, that box could be when we take that out and look into our past and see what's in it. So the boxes in the attics of our soul, when we look at our teenage years, are open. We find the pain and the blame and the shame when we're teenagers. So he encouraged us to look into the attics of our souls and come up with that. But he also mentioned that we have a good news. We have a good news because our Jesus, our Savior, meets us in that cross-section of our pain and shame. And he's the one who's going to be there with us and really heal us from our pain and our shame. So with that, I'm going to go and move into our adulthood and really start talking about who we are right now and what are the stages that are, as young people, we're facing with. So I like this picture from the baby all the way up to, sort of kind of my age at the end. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Thank you for reminding me. Okay. So we are actually going to define adulthood. And what I'm going to tell you today is something very, very prevalent. It's something that a lot of people don't know. But I want you to know because this is really important. In our society today, adulthood is defined differently. In year 2000, a gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Arnett started defining what's happening to the adults right now. His name, he coined a word called emerging adulthood. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what is the meaning of emerging adulthood. Emerging adulthood is right now in this society, not when I was growing up, not about a generation ago, But in today's society, starting from year 2000 on, about 20 years, about 20, 25 years, emerging adulthood is referring from age 18 to age 30. Hence, the journey of life right now, this age group of all of you that are sitting here are a part of this cohort called emerging adulthood. And I'll explain to you what that is. And the reason I'm telling you this is because when I start explaining the stages to you, you'll start knowing and identifying with some of the things very, very closely. So there are 5 stages of emerging adulthood. And what it means is that emerging adult is, and let me just first go through the stages and I'll tell you what really that is, okay? So emerging adults, and you might think about it, are you identifying with any of these? Are exploring their identity. They want to find out who they really are. Who am I? What am I here for? And that's one of the main things that emerging adults are looking for. Again, emerging adult is between the ages of what? Between 18 to 30 right now. And it's not a hard line, Emma. It's not a hard line. It could be 18 to 27. It could be 18 to 30. It could be 18 to 26. But there are some indications when you jump out of this emerging adulthood into an adulthood. One of the ones is going to be when you get married, you're jumping into the adulthood. One of the other ones is when you're completely financially independent, you're jumping into the full adulthood. You start feeling like you know that. And then the next one is basically attaining autonomy from your parents. But you will see right now, one of the most important things that we're looking into and researching, the emerging adults are researching, is their own identity. Who are they? Okay. The second one is their instability. There's a lot of us that we have the work, we work is unstable, our faith sometimes is unstable, most of the time is unstable, our love life sometimes is unstable, right? And, so our beliefs, our faith, our work, our love life, everything, these are the things that are unstable. If you come a little later, then you have to start moving in the front. Just so you know. There are places here in the front if you guys want, but however you're comfortable. Because there are some chairs here in the front. So the identity exploration is number 1. Instability is number 2. We're still, a lot of things are questionable for us. We still are researching that. And then self-focus. Self-focus doesn't mean that I'm very much selfish. It does not. That's not what the meaning of self-focus is. Self-focus means that right now I'm trying to build myself. If I'm age 18 to 30 in this society, I'm trying to find out who I am, what my work is, what is all this. And usually our parents or our loved ones are not really in our realm of attention. We're very much self-focused on trying to establish who we are, what we are doing. Yes? Selfishness is when you're really thinking about yourself in terms of you want everything for yourself, right? Self-focus is I'm trying to establish my job, so I have to think about, doing, going to interviews, going to the school, going to doing all this. So everything is about establishing yourself so you can step up to the adulthood. So there is a difference. Thank you for asking. There's definitely a difference between self-focus and selfishness. So self-focus is number 3. And then feeling in between. You don't know, sometimes you feel like a child, sometimes you feel like an adult. And I've asked some of you, I said, do you feel like an adult? Are you ready to go out there and be, they go, well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And that's really called feeling of in-betweenness, okay? Now, it might not apply to some of you, but to most of the 18 to about 25, 26-year-old, it applies. And then also, right now, in this world, in this society, there are more possibilities than there were like 100 years ago for people your age. So I want you to be aware of that too. So these are the explanations of Jeffrey Arnett, who actually researched for 20 years and saw how these children are being born and going into adulthood and emerging adulthood. So he's not calling your age group as adults or young adults, because it says young adults is still questionable, but he's calling this age group as emerging adults. So let's just go back and see what is the rise of emerging adulthood. Why this? Why I would never be called an emerging adult. Just so you know, when I grew up, and this is the truth, one generation of your parents, we knew we were finishing high school, we're going to university, we're getting married, we're having children, we have to work, we have to. The defining lines were very clear. We knew this is what it was. But right now, when I look at the young adults and the emerging adults of today, the defining lines are very fuzzy. There are no such defining lines anymore. You know, you go more, you know, right now there are 28 years old that are still going to school. You know, they're still like, you know, 30-year-olds who are not married. They're just not. The age of marriage has gone much higher, by the way. Average-wise, it used to be much earlier. Right now, it's much later. For women, it's 26, 27 average age, and for men, it's 30, 31. Whereas before, my age, the average age was for women 22, 23, about 25 years ago. It was much earlier. So all this there's a shift of this identity. There's a shift of this adulthood that's happening. So when you look at the factors, why? The question is why? In true, your generation, why your generation is experiencing it any differently than our generation? And these are the answers, actually. These are the circumstances that has led to the emerging adulthood. One is there are 4 societal revolutions that happen. And I'll tell you, it might just ring a bell, actually. One of the ones is technology revolution. It's not necessarily the social media, no. It's actually after the Industrial Revolution, something happened called the technology revolution, meaning America, that was a farming society, started moving into a manufacturing society. And they also needed people like yourself, your age, young people, to start going to more school, getting more educated, and be more specifically learned in one subject. So before, it was like people would go farming, they would be very simple, they'd get out, they'd get married. Right now, in the manufacturing and technological world, education is very, very important. So people started specializing. When you start specializing, you go to school, not just, 4 years ago. There's so many dentists, nurses, doctors here that are to be doctors in this group, or CPAs, or people, that you just don't stop at 4 years. You keep on going. So the education started going because of the technology revolution. The second one was sexual revolution. By sexual revolution, I mean the advent of birth control pill. In 1964, when birth control pill came about, all the women and men started becoming more promiscuous in their activities. So really, marriage wasn't something that was needed to, okay, let's just cohabit, we could still cohabitate together and have, intimate relationship. We don't have to get married because of the pill. I never knew this. I never knew that creation of pill could really make such a drastic, effect on emerging adulthood. See how societal things change. And I have a book that I have it with me if you guys want to read further and learn about what's happening in the society today with the young people, because that's my interest. It's amazing how some of the societal things that our generation, thanks to us, brought to you, that is bringing you to where you are. So that happened in 1964, and that started changing the situation. The women's movement. In the 60s and 70s, there was a women's movement. Women became more independent. They started becoming more professional. They started becoming doctors, lawyers, engineers, and starting going to school and really not being that, 1920s and 30s women that were only expecting to go and get married and become, there used to be a joke saying you're going to university to get your MRS degree, which means Mrs. degree. Most women actually went to university to get married, not to get educated. So the women's movement, when they started becoming more professional, they started really, contributing to the fact that women started getting married later. So then there is the youth movement. Who remembers the hippies? The 60s and 70s, the hippies, right? There is this, it's better to die young, all this music about, being young and restless and all that. So there was a youth movement in the 60s and 70s that really emphasized a prolonged youth. So prolonged youth, it kind of spilled over into this century. So we started really, the emerging young adults started exploring who they are. And these are the factors the society, throw at them that this is what's happening. So some of the things that you're feeling right now, I just want to tell you, the reason I'm telling you this is some of the things that you're feeling right now has actually been handed down to you because of all these movements and where you are in the society. So I wanted to actually start sharing with you a video by Fuller Youth Institute by my professor, who is an expert in youth and young adults. So I wanted to really show you what is happening in the area of instability, why you're feeling so unstable and unstable. If you are, and if you're not, you would know why some people are feeling. If you're not there, you know someone who is. So you know what that situation is like. So I would like Vojtik to play it. It's a 10-minute video. Please pay attention. It's very important information that you will carry with you for many years, and you will know why some people your age, if not yourself, are feeling what you're feeling. So, Vojtik John, it's Dr. Stephen Argue at Fuller Youth Institute. So, yeah.
You remember, as we talked about young or emerging adults in the last video, that I said that belief in work and love seem to be crucial factors that young adults in their 20s are especially working through. These are really important for them as they're getting traction as they think about the rest of their lives. Now, as religious people, we think deeply about this idea, especially of belief, and we might call it belief. We might also call it faith. What's interesting about the concept of faith is I think sometimes we think about it as a noun, something that we have or lose, and we lose sight of the fact that faith also has this verbing quality to it, where we don't just have faith, we faith. And so around FYI, we sometimes call this faithing. And Kara and Paul and I, in our book Growing With, we define faithing in this way, that it's owning, embodying our journeys with God as we encounter new experiences and information. What I tell my students in my classes here at Fuller, and what I tell leaders as well, is that all people, but especially those in their third decade of life, are thinking about faith in this way. They're saying, in no uncertain terms, how does my faithing keep up with the increasingly complex life that I'm experiencing? How does my faithing keep up with the increasingly complex life that I am living? It seems as though that if we don't have our faithing keep up with our increasingly complex lives, that the two will begin to separate and faithing will be left behind because it can't keep up. So how do we do that? What are the challenges for us individually, and how do we think about that as a community as well? Now, maybe one of the ways for us to even sort of think about this idea of faithing is rooted in these deeper concepts of stability and instability. When we talk about this idea of perceived stability, this is the place where people feel familiar, connected. They feel like they're conforming to the group and everyone sort of believes the same things. Life just seems to make sense. But there are times when in life, when things come along where people feel vulnerable, they have the sense of longing and loss. They feel an intellectual, emotional, or relational upheaval. There doesn't seem to be any apparent answers. There's an increase in doubt. New resources need to be sought to kind of figure out what's going on. And sometimes this instability isn't just negative, it can be positive as well. I may be entering into a really serious relationship, and I've never had one like that before. I may be going to college for the first time, and I'm the first one in my family, first generation college student to step into that space. I may be traveling across the country to start a dream that I've always had, and I don't know what I'm going to do. So these spaces of instability aren't just necessarily negative. They can be positive as well, but they raise these emotions along the way. The hope would be is that at some point we have a maturing stability where there's this sense of coming home and reconnection with the things and the people that are important to us. This reorientation of sort of our own calling in God's life, or who we are as people. And it also comes with this new renewed energy and vision where we are able to see things that we can't see before, simply because we've taken steps in that direction. Now, what's interesting about this little description here is that it doesn't really look like that. As a matter of fact, I think often, especially in congregations, we sort of assume that life is like this, that most people are living stable lives, and once in a while, instability flares up, we work through it, and then we sort of move on. And so if we think about it, think about the ways that our ministries are actually designed to kind of cultivate the sense of stability, to almost assume that people are living stable lives. Now, in reality, I wonder, and we wonder at FYI, if life is lived more in this way, where perhaps there's a little bit of stability every once in a while, but in people's lives, they're actually filled with lots of instability. New news that shapes us, new challenges that come our way, new crises that throw us off, and we have to figure it out. New challenges that we've never had before. Perhaps in our own lives, and especially in the lives of young adults, the amount of instability is actually quite dramatic. And what would happen if our ministries assumed that this was actually the reality, rather than lots of stability, there was actually lots of instability? How might that shape or change the way that we think about the people in our communities and the ways that we think about ministry? Now, if we just kind of bring this back just so that it's manageable, what's interesting is that I think a lot of times when people experience instability, the instinct of those in our congregations can be this, that we don't want them to experience pain. We don't want them to go through a hard time. And so what happens is we try to draw them back to this perceived stability that they have before. No, don't think that. Don't you know that tradition says this, or the Bible says this, or we've always done it this way, or whatever the case might be, right? We can call people back to this safe space, we would say, this space of perceived stability, where we can somehow help them avoid the sense of instability. The conflicting longings we have for our people, though, is that we want them to mature. We want them to have a deeper sense of their connection with God and the stability that comes back. But the only way that we can get there is to actually go through the instability. How do we help young people navigate the instabilities in their lives rather than avoid them? These are the challenges and questions that we have to think about. And I wonder if even in the conversations that you've had with each other and with the young people in your communities, if you have sensed this instability and wondered what it might mean for our ministries. Now, as we think about this, we have said in this cohort that one of the ways that we can begin to address this is to start with young people and not programs. Instead of creating a program and trying to invite young people to come to it, what if we were to step into these spaces where young adults are? We were to listen to them and begin to understand the instabilities in their lives, and then think about how we might use the resources of our communities to support and help them work through it. So we want to start with people, not programs. We're going to listen for empathy, and you've already been doing that. And the other way that we want to think about this is that listening can be really broad and it can be all over the place. But what if we had lenses for listening, which we call identity, belonging, and purpose? Now, really briefly, you can read these slides in more detail later. But when we talk about identity, it's really this human, deeply human question of saying, who am I? Again, a really crucial question for those who are in their 20s. When it comes to belonging, it's this, where do I belong? Who are my people? Who are the significant relationships and communities that I have that I want to be a part of? And then this idea of purpose has this idea of, what difference do I make? How does my fingerprint make a difference in the world? And how and what am doing is congruent with who I think God has made me to be. Now, we all have these questions all the time, but once again, young adults in their 20s are particularly asking these questions, sometimes seriously for the first time, knowing that the way they answer these questions could literally shape the trajectories of their lives. Now, as we think about that, we recognize the fact that these questions of identity, belonging, and purpose are rooted probably in a narrative that they have about the way the world works. We all have a narrative that we all are trying to live right in the middle of as to how the world works. So think about it this way. If my narrative is this, that the world is competitive, I might think of my identity as being a competitor, that my job is to recognize the fact that I must succeed in what I do because that's what it means to actually have people accept me so that I can belong. And my purpose is to win and to keep winning. That is the only way that I can preserve my identity and find a sense of belonging, is if I keep coming out on top. Now, again, there's no judgment with that, but perhaps as we listen to our young adults, we can begin to understand where they're coming from. If this is the narrative that's driving the way they look at the world, maybe their actions aren't as strange as we think they are, but actually align with that. Now, what if I had a situation where I went through trauma and I see my narrative as the world as being a dangerous place? I might look at myself as a survivor. I might seek belonging where it's a safe place. And my purpose in life is to avoid risk because I know what that could lead to. Now, again, we could encourage young adults or people to say, you need to take a risk and you need to trust God. But if my narrative has been that of trauma or the fact that the world is a dangerous place, maybe my cautiousness makes sense. And what I need to do is, what I want more than anything else is for someone to understand that. Now, in a perfect world, and this is what we would hope for perhaps with a gospel narrative, is that God has made the world, God rescues us and invites us to co-create the world to make the world a better place. Now my identity is I'm made in the image of God, and I seek community where I can receive and give. That's the whole idea of belonging. And this purpose is to live the best version of me and make the world a better place. Now, what we have is this opportunity, I think, to proclaim a gospel narrative that calls people to answer the questions of identity, belonging, and purpose in even more beautiful and powerful ways.
So let me ask you a question. The narratives that he was talking about, there were 3 different narratives. Do you remember which were the narratives? What? Competitor. If the world is a competition. Number 2. And if the world, survivor. The world is dangerous because I am a survivor. I survived a trauma, or I'm going through a trauma. And the world is a competition. So I'm going to really go ahead. I'm going to get all those degrees. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be, because the world is a competition. So I am moving on that competition. I'm going ahead to move forward. And the last one was what? I'm made in the image of God. So this whole understanding of what our identity is to move from wherever the narrative is right now. Whatever we see ourselves right now. We see ourselves a victim. We see ourselves, whatever the situation is, moving from there to finally coming down to that green box where it says, I am made in the image of God. I am safe in his hand, and I am the child of God, and I'm safe wherever I am. That's where I'm supposed to be, whatever I'm doing. So moving from here, moving for whatever my narrative is. I was thinking, by the way, just so you know, my narrative as I was growing up is the only way I can really make myself known and valuable is by accomplishing. I have to accomplish. So for those of you who know me, you know that I have accolades. I'm not just saying this so that I will look good. I really don't care about those accolades anymore, because now I've truly understood what God and my relationship is. But before I really knew that I'm a child of God, all I did is I kept getting this award, check, this award, check, this degree, check, this degree, check. I mean, I have like degrees and awards galore. But one day, the day that I understood that I am a child of God, that no matter what and who I am and what my value is, I walked into my office. I had a credenza full of awards. My sister is witness. I cleaned up all those awards, and I wanted to throw it away because the only thing that was important for me, I had understood, was that the only thing that mattered was that God loves me. I have an award from God, and none of them were important for me. My coworker actually asked me not to throw them away because she said, you could take pictures of them and show it to your grandkids. So You know, so that was the only reason I still have it tucked away somewhere. But truly, the value that I gave to those awards and all those accomplishments dropped once I really knew what the real value is in. So let me just finish this, and I'm going to ask Shervin to come and share something with all of us. But let me just go back to our identity exploration. So we, our own age, the emerging adults, are working on identity, belonging, and purpose. And we have been working on this journey to find out what our identity is by lamenting, by coming back to God and sharing our pain with prayer, with sharing with each other in small groups. So what we have been doing is trying to find out, to go back to really understand what are our vulnerabilities and what is our narrative. Is right now we're going to start thinking in this session, in the small groups, what our narratives are. So do I see the world as a competition? Do I see the world as a dangerous place, as she said, Natalie? Or do I see myself as God's creation? Am I God's creation? Which one? There's also different kinds. These are not the only kinds, by the way. These are just examples, okay? So the transition between stability and instability is that transition from understanding what the narrative is that we see and what the narrative is that God gives us. So in order for us to attain that stability is to start knowing ourselves the way God knows us. And what is our mantra? I'm created. I praise you because I'm wonderfully and beautifully made.